All right, today we're going to peel back the layers of the Malaysian legal system. We're going to look at the rules that shape this entire nation, giving you a really clear guide to how it all works from the ground up.
So have you ever really stopped to think about it? We know countries have laws, but where do they actually come from? Well, we're going to use Malaysia as our case study today, and it's a fantastic example. And hey, if you're ever thinking of doing business there, knowing this stuff is absolutely crucial. So let's dive in.
Okay, so the very first thing you need to get about Malaysia's legal system is this fundamental split. On one side, you have written law. Think of this as the official, published rulebook that everyone can go and look up. But on the other side, you've got unwritten law. This is more like a guide built from tradition, past court decisions, and custom. It's how these two things work together that makes the whole system tick.
So, to really understand how Malaysian law works, we got to start by looking at its legal blueprint. This is the master plan, right? It shows how all the different pieces of the puzzle fit together. So, just to hammer this home, every single law in Malaysia can be traced back to one of these two places. It's either written down in an official document, or it's part of that unwritten guide that's been shaped by years of practice. Got it? Cool. Let's dig into that first source. All right, let's tackle that first category, the written rulebook. These are the formal, official laws that you can literally hold in your hand or, find in a PDF. This is the most structured part of the whole system. Now, what's really important to get is that not all written laws are created equal. Nope, there's a clear hierarchy, kind of like a ladder of power, and we're gonna climb it, starting right at the very top. At the absolute peak, you've got the federal constitution. This isn't just a law, it is the law, the boss. Article 4 makes it super clear. If any other law goes against what the Constitution says, that law is wiped out. It's the master plan for the whole government, and most importantly, it guarantees the basic rights of all its citizens. So how does the Constitution divvy up the power to make all these laws? Well, it's broken down into 3 lists. The federal list gives Parliament in the capital power over the big national stuff like defense. Then you have the state list, which lets each state's assembly handle local things, like land matters. And then there's the concurrent list, for shared stuff, like public health, where both can make laws. It's a real balancing act. Now, that next rung on the ladder is legislation, but that one word covers a whole lot of history. This timeline is actually pretty cool. It shows how the names of the laws themselves changed depending on who was in charge and when. You go from military proclamations to pre-independence ordinances, all the way to the modern Acts of Parliament. It's like a little time capsule in legal language. And finally, at the bottom of our written law ladder, you've got subsidiary legislation. Think of it like this. If an act of Parliament is the main frame of a house, these are the nitty-gritty details, like the specific rules for wiring and plumbing. These are the regulations that make the big laws actually work day to day, and they can be updated way faster, which is super useful. Okay, so we've gone through the official rulebook, but that's really only half the story. Now we're going to flip over and look at the other side, the unwritten influences. These are the laws that you won't find in some big government book, but trust me, they are just as powerful. A huge part of this unwritten guide comes from judges' decisions. It's like a referee in a football game making a tough call. That call then sets the standard, a precedent for all future games. In law, this is called stare decisis, and it means lower courts have to follow what higher courts have already decided. This is what keeps the law consistent and predictable. It's basically the legal system's memory. Next up is a direct link to Malaysia's history, English law. You can think of it as a borrowed chapter from an old textbook. But, and this is a big but, it can only be used under very specific rules. It's only applied when there's a gap in local Malaysian law, and even then, judges have to make sure it's actually suitable for the local situation. It's still pretty important in business law, but it's totally excluded from anything to do with land. And, of course, reflecting the nation's incredible diversity, you have customary and Islamic law. These traditions are deeply rooted, and they mainly govern personal stuff like marriage, divorce, and inheritance for specific communities. It's also super important to remember that Islamic law is handled at the state level, not the federal level, which really tells you a lot about Malaysia's unique structure. Okay, so we understand the written rulebook and the unwritten guide, but what happens when people disagree? What happens when there's a dispute? How do you actually solve the problem? When a conflict kicks off, you basically have two main paths you can take. You can go through the formal court system, that's called litigation, or you can use a bunch of other methods that are all grouped together under the name Alternative Dispute Resolution, or ADR for short. So you've got two main choices, the courts or ADR. Let's break these down, because which path you choose can have a massive impact on how much time and money you spend and, the final outcome. If you go the formal court route, you're looking at this hierarchy. Most cases start at the bottom, in the magistrates or sessions courts. If you're not happy with the result, you can appeal up the ladder, all the way to the federal court, which is the highest court in the land. Their decision is final.
So why on earth would anyone choose ADR instead of going to court? Well, this comparison makes it pretty obvious. ADR is way less formal, it's usually much, much faster, and it can save you a ton of money. For a lot of people and businesses, that makes it a no-brainer.
And ADR isn't just one thing. You've got options. With mediation, a neutral person helps the two sides work out their own agreement. In arbitration, someone acts like a private judge and makes a decision that's legally binding. Then you've got special tribunals for things like consumer complaints and the ombudsman for when you have a problem with the public body.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? Honestly, the best way to think about the Malaysian legal system is as this incredible, unique tapestry. It's not just one thing. It's a complex weave of written rules from the Constitution, mixed with unwritten wisdom from judges, ancient customs, and all those historical influences. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. In a world that's more connected than ever, how does a country's unique legal tapestry, like the one in Malaysia, do more than just make rules? How does it actually help define and protect its national identity? It's a pretty deep question. Thanks for tuning in.